Gurave Gaurachandraya Radhikaya Tadale Krishnaya Krishna Bhaktaya Tad Bhaktaya Namo Namaha. So, pranam to all. Good morning. Greetings from North Carolina. Welcome. And well, today we are, as announced, doing our official book launch of Radical Personalism. Here we have it. For those of you who do not have it, here's a printed version of it. Radical Personalism Revival Manifesto for Proactive Devotion. So from today on, the book is available in Amazon in soft and hardbound, also Kindle format. I will be sharing the links to how to get the book eventually in the comment section here in the Facebook and YouTube. Or you just put Radical Personalism on Amazon. It will be there. So very happy to be presenting today officially this little offering to all of you, to the Vaishnava community. So today is the book launch. I would like to begin sharing a few words about why we have chosen this particular day to launch the book, since, to be honest, the book was already ready for a few weeks ago, but there was some synchronicity with our Vaishnava calendar and the content of the book. So by talking why today, also I'll be starting to talk what the book is about. So today, at least here in North Carolina, we are celebrating in our Gaudiya tradition what's called Gundicha Marjanam Lila, or the pastime of the cleansing of the Gundicha temple in Jagannath Puri. And also yesterday, we were celebrating the Tirobhav Mahotsav, or disappearance day of Sri Gadadhar Pandit and Sri Bhaktivinoda Thakur. And in some countries, not here, but in some places today, that's the celebration. It's taking place today, the disappearance day of Gadadhar Pandit and Thakur Bhaktivinoda. So somehow today, depending on where you are, these three celebrations are converging. Gundicha Marjan Lila and disappearance day of Gadadhar Pandit and Bhaktivinoda Thakur. So all these three celebrations, and this was not planned, but naturally unfolded, are in different ways connected to each other and in different ways connected to the content of the book, Radical Personalism. So I'd like to share a few words about why, again, we are launching the book today in connection to these celebrations, and then we will go further to the content of the book and so on and so forth. So let's begin with Sri Gadadhar Pandit, Ki Jai, who is, as you know, Sri Radha appearing Gaur Lila, Sri Radha exhibiting her highest moment of dedication, because Sri Radha's Gadadhar is serving Krishna's Mahaprabhu, and Krishna's Mahaprabhu is Krishna in his moment of highest need. So if Krishna has his highest moment of need, that immediately becomes Radha's highest moment of need by way of identification with the service necessity. So again, Gadadhar is Sri Radha, and I have already talked about this in my series and in the book as well. Sri Radha sometimes is called Sri Radhika. Her love is so radical that sometimes we can talk in terms not only of radical personalism, but also of radical personalism, or Radhika's personalism, Srimati, radical personalism. Because we cannot have radical personalism as it is, this book and the concept, we cannot have radical personalism without Sri Radhika, without her radical dedication to her beloved, especially in the form of Sri Gadadhar Pandit. Because as we know, again, Sri Radha's Gadadhar is giving her heart, Sri Radha giving her heart to Krishna's Mahaprabhu, so Gaur Hari can be successful, basically, in the main reason for his descent, in the main purpose of the whole Gaur Lila. And by Mahaprabhu becoming fully successful by the grace of Gadadhar, Mahaprabhu ends up being, for all of us Gaudiya Vaishnavas, the ultimate deity of Gaudiya Vaishnavism. In other words, the ultimate deity of radical personalism, because radical personalism is another way of talking about Gaudiya Vaishnavism. So this is one of the reasons why we have chosen to launch the book today, how deeply the personality and contribution of Sri Gadadhar Pandit is tied with what Gaudiya Vaishnavism and what radical personalism, Radhika's personalism is about. And on the same day of Gadadhar's disappearance, again, in some countries, here it was yesterday, some places today, also Bhaktivinoda Thakur is entering Nitya Lila, passing away. And of course, here we have no time to present in detail the connection between Gadadhar Pandit, Bhaktivinoda Thakur. That's a separate lecture unto itself. Yesterday we shared a link to a lecture we gave last year on this topic. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur himself was worshipping Gaur Gadadhar as his Istadev, his main deities. But at least one important connection I'd like to make between Thakur Bhaktivinoda and Gadadhar Pandit, and then of Thakur Bhaktivinoda with the book itself, is that, again, Gadadhar Pandit represents, as I mentioned, Sri Radha in her moment of greatest identification with the necessity of service that Krishna is having as Gaur Hari. And again, Krishna is wanting to taste Radha Bhav, and Radha appears as Gadadhar to identify with that necessity and make that possible. So again, Gadadhar is deeply tied to this notion of serving in the moment of greatest necessity. And then we have Bhaktivinoda Thakur, who worships Gadadhar Pandit, and he once said famously, "I would like to leave my body in Kurukshetra, because there Sri Radha is experiencing her greatest moment of necessity when she's meeting with Krishna in the solar eclipse, but they cannot get together." So again, Bhaktivinoda Thakur is fully identifying himself with Sri Radha and her service necessity. And so Gadadhar is Radha identifying with Krishna's greatest necessity. Bhaktivinoda Thakur is identifying with Radha's greatest necessity. So we see this pattern present, no? Identification with the service necessity. So similarly, and not, of course, with this comparing me with comparing the book or anything with Gadadhar and Bhaktivinoda Thakur, but somehow, on some level, this book on radical personalism connects with this principle of identifying a great, at least, necessity. I don't know if it's the greatest, but a great necessity of service in the present moment, in the current times in our Gaudiya community. Because again, in this book, we are trying to address different situations in the Gaudiya zeitgeist, in the current time, place, and circumstance we are in our scenario that may require recalibration, adjustment, and revival. But all that, again, in the spirit of service, in the spirit of naming and framing necessities of service and trying to honor that. So in that way, somehow there is a connection between Gadadhar, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, and the book in terms of identifying with the necessity of service. But also, apart from this connection, what came to mind is that in connection to Bhaktivinoda Thakur, and we are getting closer to the connection with Gundicha, Marjan Lila, but in connection to Bhaktivinoda Thakur also, I've chosen to launch this book today, which is his disappearance day in some places, because all that Bhaktivinoda Thakur represents for us in the Bhaktivinoda Parivar, Bhaktivinoda Thakur himself being an essence seeker, he himself coining this term Saragrahi Vaishnav, essence seeker Vaishnav. He was a real progressive reformer in our lineage. He exhibited a very dynamic and fluid way of conceiving and presenting and sharing Gaudiya Vaishnavism in a way that may be relevant and relatable to people in their particular time, and establishing that principle for the times to come. He was someone who was open to interact with modernity in a very interesting way, and he was open to embrace whatever challenges may come as a result of embracing modernity, because you interact with modernity and some challenges will come, and you have to be willing to deal with them, retaining this spirit of service. And so Bhaktivinoda Thakur was someone very exemplary in all the things. So he was able to interact with modernity, embrace the challenges that come from there, without losing depth, without losing breadth in his own inner life as a Gaudiya, without losing sight of the mystical culture that Gaudiya Vaishnavism is all about. And also, like himself, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, or like his own son, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, and many other gurus, sadhus, acharyas, and mystics, even from other traditions, Bhaktivinoda Thakur also was someone open to, again, name, frame, criticize in a loving, healthy way the current state of his own tradition. And he engaged in that criticism as a symptom, as a natural expression of his loyalty and his commitment to the tradition, and not the other way around. And he will say different things. One of them that I quoted in my book at least twice, and I think I quoted that in my first book at least once, so you can tell that I like that section a lot. He will say in one of his Sajjan Toshani publications, the magazine he published, those who have been entrusted with the responsibility of being spiritual teachers in the Gaudiya Sampradaya should try to remove all anarthas from their Sampradaya. So of course you need to understand that it doesn't mean that the essence of the tradition is full of anarthas, Mahaprabhu's gift is full of anarthas, but the form, how the tradition may be conceived and represented by different people in the particular times may be accompanied by certain anarchic, not anarchic, also maybe anarchic visions. So that needs to be uprooted. And he's saying here is the commitment of everyone who is to represent the tradition as a leader, so to say, to uproot those anarthas. So since we invoke this idea of uprooting anarthas or anarthanibriti, comes the natural connection with Gundicha Marjan Lila, which is representative of anarthanibriti, actually. The cleansing of this famous Gundicha temple in Jagannath Puri, which represents also Vrindavan. Of course, we don't need to take anarthas out of Vrindavan. We need to take anarthas out of our heart, so it becomes Vrindavan. So that's another point of connection. We are celebrating today Gundicha Marjan Lila, the cleansing of the heart, the anarthanibriti on a personal level, on a communal level. And again, every committed member of the Sampradaya is expected to uproot whatever anarthas may manifest in the current state of the current conditions of one's community. So Gundicha Marjan Lila represents this, anarthanibriti. And again, anarthanibriti always begins at home, as I made it clear in my series and book. This is not about pointing to others and denouncing anarthas outside of our heart, but just beginning at home, doing our homework, and whatever comes as an overflowing of that, okay, that will be legal, so to say. Natural from the individual level will naturally extend to the communal level. So this is a very glorious process. The uprooting of anarthas, Mahaprabhu himself was decorating his devotees, putting sandalwood paste and garlands before they engaged in the cleansing of Gundicha, by this saying, you are about to engage in something very glorious and important. So in that same spirit, we are trying to to write this book with the blessings of Mahaprabhu and feeling, okay, this has to do with, this is service, this identification with the need of service in whatever we may be are in the current situation. So, considering the multiple significance of these three events, again, Disappearance Day of Gadal, Pandit Bhaktivinoda Thakur, and Gundicha Marjan Lila, because of what I've just shared, I've chosen to launch the book today. I hope it makes sense and somehow it came naturally. And the book, of course, that we are launching today, as there's multi-purpose in all the celebrations we are having these days, the book in itself is multi-purpose. It's not just speaking about one single thing. It's attempting, of course, to present and to conceive Gaudiya Vaishnavism in a contemporary voice, but also it's trying to attempt, in the context of that, attempting to address pressing emerging issues in our Gaudiya community that need to be named, framed, and addressed and healed. And with that, we are inviting in this way for individual and collective healing. Not only, again, how to heal ourselves and the community, but also on top of that, how to go deeper into our tradition, how to go deeper into the dynamic meaning of our tradition. To be a Gaudiya Vaishnava, to belong to the Gaudiya Sampradaya, doesn't just mean one thing forever. It's constantly meaning something new, because it's an ever-evolving tradition, ongoing evolution internally. So basically, that's the idea, the intention of the book in a very general way, to do all this in a way that our practice, our own Gaudiya commitment, so to say, participation remains relevant and relatable for each of us, and that we don't see our practice, our tradition as something foreign to our deepest needs and intuition, in whatever stage we may be in, because each of us is in a very different chapter of the journey, so to say. And all of us need that our practice remain relatable and relevant. So that has been the attempt of the book. Of course, I personally feel that not only our own community, our Gaudiya community, is going through a certain situation, but the world at large. We have been talking about this these days. The whole world is going through a particular zeitgeist, a particular quality of the time, so to say, a unique kind of threshold moment where certain structures need to be rethought, reconsidered, so to say, both external structures as well as internal structures, internal ways of conceiving things. Many of them need to be, some of them may need to collapse, some of them may need to be upgraded, updated, adjusted, dethroned, whatever, depending the case. But it's very clear in the world at large that we are in a threshold moment in that connection. So that the Gaudiya community is not an exception to that global situation. And so in some way, this book, which has been in part, as you may know, based on a recent series of lectures that I gave during 6 months almost on radical personalism, although the book includes new content. So this book, in one sense, is attempting to speak for the collective unconscious, so to say, for those things that are in everyone's mind, somehow sometimes not in front of us, but sometimes hidden in the shed. And we need to go to the shed and clean the shed. Gundicha Marjan Lila means that, basically. So that's the idea, to name and frame many of the things that are there, but sometimes we do not see. They are in our unconscious mind, in the shed over there, or some of the many things that are there and we do not want to see. Sometimes that happens also, but we need to see. And we need not only to see, but we need to see first, of course, it's there. And then we need to address, and we need to understand, and we need to heal, and we need to improve. But it begins to first pointing, naming, and framing things that may be lurking into the subconscious mind or conscious, and we are doing our best for sometimes not dealing with that. So many devotees I've talked about with during all these months already, of course, feeling this is not one single person or 2-3 people, but it's a very like a pulse, collective pulse is kind of feeling the need of talking and thinking, and so what I've been calling in the book emerging Gaudiya Vaishnavism. Now, it's Gaudiya Vaishnavism, but the essence of Gaudiya Vaishnavism is emerging over and over again in time, repeatedly, through the voices and participation of many of its members. The essence of the tradition, again, to reclaim it, the essence of the tradition trying to reclaim its own substance, so to say. So, of course, I'm not claiming here I'm the only one doing this, and this book is the only one who is talking about this. It's just one added attempt of contributing to this service necessity. So anyhow, a few words in connection to why we are today chosen this particular day, and we are launching this book. Let's go to another section of today's presentation, which is a little bit about how this book came to happen. Although some of you may have an idea, but let's share a few words about the backdrop that somehow triggered the idea of writing this book, which was something totally, at least not in my agenda, maybe in someone else's agenda above our heads. But yeah, it has been a very beautiful experience. As I mentioned in connection to my first book, Inherent or Inherited, last year I published that first book, and I mentioned in the acknowledgement section, I think, that somehow what I mentioned there, it's still happening with this second book from a different place, of course. But I mentioned that to write my first book, it was somehow having a child, the whole process of having a child, although that's the only type of child I can have as a sannyasi. So, so now my first child is having a sibling, so that the family is expanding. So the same criteria of having a child and all these stages kind of apply to this book. Now you have like the preconception, so to say, stage that was, in my case, in the case of this book, was a totally unexpected child. Like it happens sometimes in this world. Oh, you're pregnant. Oh, we were not planning that. So it was not in my plan to. There was no preconception in one sense. There was not planned to conceive that, but it happened, as we will see next how that happened. Then comes, of course, the conception that by force of circumstance, so to say, you are invited in a way or another to do this. So the conception stage, to conceive what to write, how to write, before actually starting to write. So somehow the series of lectures on radical personalism did that part. Like I started to talk about this, and at one point the idea came, okay, the need for a book to put this in a certain particular way came. Then comes the impregnation stage before preconception and conception. After that impregnation, actually writing the book, which took a few months. It was relatively quick, but there was lots of of time before that, fermenting the content in my own mind. Then came the gestation period, so to say, the research and writing, rewriting, correcting. They came the labor period, so to say. The book is officially finished, but that's not all. Again, something else comes after the stage. Then comes raising the child, which somehow is also the book is finished, but I have peer review and editing and re-editing and re-editing and adding and layout and whatnot. So, and whatever further dialogue and ideas will come after this publication is also part of the raising the child, so to say, of radical personalisms. As I mentioned, my book is conceived by me as a conversation, as something that is an ongoing dialogue that comes and goes throughout our human history, even, so to say. So these are a few stages that I felt again in my second book, similarly to the first one, although from a very different place. So a second child, hopefully he will be a good sibling of the first one, and if there will be a few more to come to expand the family. And I want to be a good parent in that connection. I want to be a good writer, so I have to be detached also to something. If you want to be a good parent, you have to be detached from the results of your efforts. You try to raise your child in the best possible way, but it's not in your control what will happen. So my point is, I'm presenting this book today, trying to make a contribution, hopefully, to the Gaudiya Sampradaya. But at the same time, each one of us has to write their own manifesto, so to say. I'm writing my own here. But after reading that, if you read it and if you agree with it or whatever, you will have to write your own manifesto eventually, so to say, in the context of processing what we are sharing here. So how did this book came to happen? Well, there's lots to say, of course, but I would like to share a few sections. Today we will be sharing a few reading sections from the book. So I'd like to share something here with your permission. First, to begin with, from the acknowledgement section, and then we'll go to another part. So it says like this. Our whole life can be seen as a large, abundant book, either an autobiographic one or, even better, a confession letter. In fact, we often speak about our life in terms of its different chapters. In this way, the writing of this book, Radical Personalism, every single chapter is to be considered one of the many crucial sections of the book of my life. Therefore, my initial gratitude is offered to those most unexpected by sacred circumstances that recently came into my life that made the present work possible. As the best version of ourselves is always co-authored by love, this book and its author have similarly been co-authored by love, a love that came to me in the form of life and its serpentine dance. Certainly, I'm no longer the same individual who began writing this book, being considerably edited by life circumstances. Therefore, I offer this manifesto in the service of this inescrutable turn of events, as well as to the persons who were instrumental in them, with the hope that I have learned my lessons properly and I'm ready for the next version of myself. So that's a little part on the acknowledgement section regarding how the book came to happen. But at the same time, another few words from the second chapter of the first part in connection to this, to be more specific. And it says like this. It is said that God comes disguised as one's life. In a few never-ending months, my own life as I knew was no longer mine. God had come and taken it over. The most intense and unexpected visit of the sweet absolute basically deprived me of almost every aspect of my daily structure, ousting me from the very conception of who I was. From tip to toe, I was being invited to reframe, rethink, and recalibrate my whole life, since I was suddenly now uninvited from the spiritual family I had been a part of and served in for close to a decade. The details of my saga will require a separate book, and because they do not serve this current work, I don't intend to go in that direction. What is pertinent to share, however, is that I was thrown into a complete tectonic shift. I was challenged by what was then the most awkward chapter of my life, but was soon to realize I was simultaneously being gifted the opportunity to look at my life and at life itself from an entirely different perspective. Only God is capable of offering such comprehensive paradox. Imagine looking through a pair of glasses with lenses capable of showing you not a whole new world, but rather the same world in a whole new way. That was my experience, a new prescription for sure. It was my turn to view from that vantage point, to contemplate in new light not only my very existence, but others as well. And the world in which I lived, specifically my own spiritual community within that world. So, sorry for the long introduction, but this is a brief background in connection to how the book came to happen. More details will be, of course, in the book itself. So after this section of brief introduction, I would like to go with you through just to reach the end of the presentation today. Let's share a brief review of the contents of the book. So we'll do a brief review as it was announced. So the book has 443 pages. It has 14 chapters. It has a beautiful foreword wrote by Pranada Dasi. So thank you so much to her. Deep gratitude for that. It has an introduction. It has a concluding section. The book will be divided in 3 parts called Orienting Our Approach first. The second part of the book is called the Manifesto. And the third part of the book is called A Deeper Dive. And finally, there will be a conclusion section to the book called Reclaiming Our Gaudiya Project. But of course, let's begin first of all with the introduction. Let's go part by part very briefly to the introduction to the work. The introduction to the book is called Should I Stay or Should I Go? So what's the introduction about? This is in connection to a reading of a book. I wrote the introduction in connection to a reading of the book by Brian McLaren called Do I Stay Christian? And in that book, he's mentioning different reasons for him to stay as a Christian or not stay as a Christian, which gave me a very interesting inspiration as to, of course, I'm not planning to leave Gaudiya Vaishnavism, but just thinking about why to stay as a Gaudiya and why some people may choose not to stay as a Gaudiya. So I started the introduction in that connection, thinking how to stay as a Gaudiya for the right reasons, basically, and not stay for the wrong reasons, which can happen. How to belong to Gaudiya Vaishnavism deeply and not merely fitting in. That's an important part of the introduction, how to really belong. And as part of really belonging for the right reasons, I felt the need also to write the book in broader terms, so the topics may be readable and understood by different person. Since the issues I'm addressing there also happen everywhere. No? What I'm writing in this book is not only limited to the Gaudiya Sampradaya, but has to do with different traditions, again, with the zeitgeist that is going on here and there. So despite not being planned, this second book was also in continuation to many of the points that I made in my first book, Inherent or Inherited, especially introduction, the very beginning of Inherent or Inherited, I describe the Gaudiya community, and I quote, says, as in urgent need of conversation with itself, as well as of ample room for freedom of theological thought, in order to transcend the cognitive rigidity and tribal thinking that so much characterizes the approach of the novice. So that was in the first book, and somehow it was not in my plan to write the second one, but the connection was there. So Krishna had some plan indeed, even without me noticing it while writing the second book. So that's the introduction, very briefly. Should I stay or should I go? And then comes part number 1 of the book, called Orienting Our Approach. So part 1 has 6 chapters. And there I speak about different topics. I will mention the titles briefly and what's the contents very briefly, just to share further ideas on that. So the first chapter of the book is called Why Radical Personalism? So, of course, the meaning of radical personalism has not to do only with not being impersonal, but as personal as we can be. Radical it's not a bad word, it has to do with radix, to something going to the very root, something to the very core. So we are a personal tradition, and the idea is to be as personal as we can. Our tradition speaks about the supreme personality of Godhead, so that's supremely personalistic. And we therefore have an hyper-personalized proposal, culminating in, again, our deity, Mahaprabhu, Gaur Hari. So I try to unfold these ideas, speaking about radical personalism. So that's the first chapter of the first part. The second chapter is called Awkwardness and Gifts of My Present Situation. And that's basically a background to the unexpected situation and why the book came to happen, basically. Totally unexpected, but beautifully revealing the situation that led me to write this book. Then the third part is called Upgrading My Loyalty by Critiquing My Own Tradition. So it speaks about the need and place for critiquing one's own tradition as in service to that, in identification with the service necessity. Then the fourth chapter of the first part is called A Living School of Prophets, an urgent need for proactive revival. So basically there I mentioned how a Sampradaya, a school of thought, is a living school, not a mere school, but a living school of prophets. And each one of us is meant to become a prophet, basically. Each one of us is become to speak forth the tradition. And the importance of being proactive. I speak in that chapter about what I call anticipatory Vaishnavism. So how we can, in the present moment, anticipate things by addressing them properly now. Then the fifth chapter of this first part is called Holy Shift, which speaks about the importance of embracing change, ongoing change, and paradigm shifts as a natural expression of spiritual experience. And then the sixth chapter of the first part is called The Collective Unconscious of Our Spiritual Lineage, which also speaks about the importance of addressing unresolved, so to say, generational wounds that may be there, and sometimes we may be passing unresolved trauma in the name of parampara. I've talked about that in my in my series also on radical personalism. So that's a brief review on the second part of the first part of the book, sorry. And the second part of the book is called the Manifesto. The book in itself has as a subtitle the name Revival Manifesto for Proactive Devotion. And the book in itself is a manifesto, a revival manifesto, to be more precise, for proactive devotion. So the book tries to bring forth revival and revival, rebirth, new life. That's basically the spirit of the manifesto. Declaration of core principles, so to say, that need to be addressed, that need to be conceived, that need to be rediscovered, that need to be properly applied in a proactive spirit. So this second part presents such manifesto with different points, so to say, bullet points, includes some 30, so to say, bullet points or something with their specific explanation. And each one of these points is also, how to say, are expressions or extended versions of the concept of radical personalism in the form of different radicals. So we will have radical vulnerability, radical presence, radical integrity, and so on. Radical fraternity, radical enrich, radical education, radical embodiment, radical conversation, radical in a good sense of the term. So the radical section, manifesto. So this section is somehow the main one of the book, one of the longest ones. And most of the points of this section have not been actually included in my series of lectures. So I'm mentioning that's mostly included here in the book. And here I try to address points that I find crucial in what we can do to name and frame, again, what has to be improved in our community. And also I do so through two voices, the voice of radical personalism and the voice of conventional dogmatism. I kind of invoke two characters that sometimes speak in our own minds. The voice of radical personalism and the antithesis of that, so to say, and the voice of conventional dogmatism. So I play with those voices. So that's part 2, the manifesto. And finally, part 3, it's called A Deeper Dive, and includes 7 chapters in it, which somehow elaborate on the main points from the manifesto section itself. And they are connected to points in the series. I've talked in the series of lectures, but also I've developed them in the book. So which are those 7 chapters of the third part, A Deeper Dive? Chapter number 8 of the whole book, which is the first chapter of this part, is vulnerability and empowerment. You may recall this from our series. And I begin with that because there is a very crucial importance to begin speaking on that. If we would not begin being vulnerable, open ourselves, it won't happen, basically. We won't be able to open ourselves to recognize, to acknowledge, to work. And I show there how our tradition revolved fully around the principle of vulnerability, of inner nakedness. We talk about that. Darshan, the importance of presenting ourselves to the absolute with full vulnerability. So that will be chapter 8. Chapter 9 is called individuation, carving out our full humanity in divine service. So that's chapter 9. And basically I address that the need for individuation, that if we want to attain Nara Lila, as I hope we want, that's a part of our goal, we need to become fully human and fully divine. The two of them need to be in place, basically. So we don't need to reject anything. We need to integrate everything. That's a big part of the individuation process, and I touch upon that in this chapter number 9. Then comes chapter number 10, which is called non-dual thinking. Everything is one, but never impersonal. So then I talk about the importance of remaining non-dual, of understanding the non-dual foundation of our sampradaya. And in this connection, the risk of polytheism, because our tradition is so much detail about different forms of the absolute and different manifestation of the Godhead, that we may end up worshiping different gods, thinking in different gods, while actually we are worshiping one same non-dual substance. And then I talk about that, about intrafaith dialogue and theological cross-pollination, and aspects of also of non-dual thinking and finding the same absolute in different mystical traditions as well. Then chapter 11 is called Issues and Tissues Between Guru and Disciple. And then I talk about absolute and relative side of the Guru, the principle of infallibility, omniscience, how much that's applied to the Guru, living and being rejected by the Guru, different possibilities and unexpected scenarios there, codependence, healthy surrender, and so on. Worship versus idolatry, spiritual bypassing. I mean, I gave this class in my this topic I've touched on my series, and this has been very much probably the most watched sections of it, and so much that probably I'm thinking about eventually writing a whole separate book about the topic. But let's see what Krishna wants. Then comes chapter 12, which is called Divine Ignorance, Knowing Through Darkness, Doubt, and Paradox. So there we will be talking about certainty as the antithesis of faith, or what else? Like learning ignorance of the importance of knowing through unknowing, the dark night of the soul, God as mystery and secret, being comfortable with coexisting with what we don't know, basically. Then we have chapter 13 of the book called The Realm of Contemplative Prayer, where I speak about the importance of prayer, what prayer is not, the nature of unconditional love, how to engage in actual prayer, a very important aspect of our Gaudiya tradition and sadhana that sometimes tends to be overlooked. So that's chapter 13. And finally, chapter 14 is called Unearthing Heaven, How Material Energy Hosts the Spiritual World. So basically, I try to address the idea of matter as not being profane, as being sacred, the world as a byproduct of God's joy. That's a very interesting idea. The material world having at the background Krishna's Ananda, and talking about how God himself comes to validate this place over and over again by descending as avatar, by executing his Leela here, and so on. So that's chapter 14. And then we have the conclusion to the book. There is a conclusion section called Reclaiming Our Gaudiya Project. So that section kind of wraps up the whole content of the book. So let's almost conclude today's meeting by reading a brief section of this conclusion. So before reading, the conclusion section includes, I would like to share with you a few subsections with the names like Emerging and Anticipatory Gaudiya Vaishnavism, Where Are the Elders, Uncommon Common Sense, Confrontation, Truth-Telling, and Intimacy, The Right and Duty to Rediscover Our Tradition, another one called Learn to Sing Your Song, among others. So let me read a brief subsection called A New Version of Gaudiya Vaishnavism. So it says like this. If we don't feel identified with the current state of affairs in the Gaudiya community, it is then time for a new version of Gaudiya Vaishnavism. In some cases, this new version will emerge after articulating those specific circumstances that beg for an upgrade, while in other cases, we will have to deeply ponder what we can do about it. We should pay close attention, focus on our surroundings, inner and outer, and notice what actually bothers and concerns us, and then do something about it. In other words, each of us needs to ask ourselves what bothers us, then question if that is something we can fix, and then inquire if we are willing to do the fixing. If our answer to any of those questions is no, then we should aim elsewhere, probably lower, and until we find something that bothers us that we can fix and that we will fix, and then we should go and fix it. That might be enough for the day. Conversely, by not taking the initiative, we remain as passive inert consumers of a mere product, not active participants in a living school. But this we should remember. Being committed to nothing and staying on the fence is the worst of all transgressions. Therefore, if we are bothered by some issues in the present Gaudia community,